Welcome, new and old friends. My name is 242, and today 42 got us two stories that she borrowed from a friend. So, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. As I locked the doors after the last shift for the day, I kept thinking about relaxing on the couch tomorrow. Little did I know, tomorrow would be anything but relaxing, since I was not the only one who was left in the gas station that night. If you're enjoying this video, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. The Man at My Funeral by As the Raven Dreams. Last night, I dreamed I was at my own funeral. I've been having this dream almost every night for the last year. It's such a serene feeling, seeing the people you love mourn losing you. At the same time, it's also kind of nice knowing that these people care so much about my existence. Obviously, having this kind of dream would be mildly unsettling to most, but I see it as an opportunity to know that when things come to an end, people will actually care. As of late, though, there's been a disturbing part of the dream. I keep seeing this person that I don't recognize. He stands among my friends and family and just seems to loom the entirety of this service. For some reason, I can't place a name to his face, but I can feel that something is off about him. The couple of times I've seen him, he always seems to target someone in the crowd and approach them to console them. He seems so very gentle with them. But when I see his eyes, they seem to have a faint hue, a slight red glow, as he stares at where I lie in my coffin. Now I know most people would just say that it's nothing more than a dream. But I've watched him approach two people in this dream. Both people that he has approached have ended up getting into horrible accidents. One of them passed away. The other will never walk or speak again. I know it's just a dream, but how can it be a coincidence that two people the man approached in my dream both end up where they are? There's only so much that you can equate to random chance. Last night, I dreamed I was at my own funeral again, and the man was there. He was there during the entirety of the service, and this time he did something different. He requested to give my eulogy. He stood in front of the entire crowd of people and spoke to them, comforting them and telling them I was in a better place. This morning, I received a call that my parents and my younger sister were hit by a drunk driver. None of them survived. I saw a news report that there was a fire at the local college in the dorm where a number of my friends stayed. My girlfriend's mother called me this morning to tell me that she had taken her own life the night before. All of them were gone, comforted by his words and lulled into the afterlife. Now, I'm sitting here waiting my turn. You see, at the end of my dream, after the eulogy, he turned to look at my body in the coffin. He ran a hand through my hair and told me everything would be okay. His words were comforting, and I felt calm as I watched his glowing eyes pierce my soul. No one in their wildest dreams expected the cure to climate change to come out of melting one of the nondescript glaciers on Greenland. The few thousand that survived the plague it released lived out the rest of their lives in a world with a pleasant, stable climate. Remember to tell me what you think down below and hit that like button and make sure it feels it. The Last Sunset by As the Raven Dreams. Well, here we go. We stood on our roof and stared out over the horizon as the sun set. The bright yellow was shredded by gorgeous maroon that slowly faded its way into dim purple. I pulled up my camera and took a picture of the scene in front of us. The picture struggled to capture the absolute beauty of the whole event. Maybe actually living it was what made it so breathtaking. We sat there and just watched as the sky slowly darkened, as pinhole lights slowly took over into the darkness, and the golden shades of the day finally faded into nothingness. There was something magical in being part of this moment. You see, this sunset, it was different. It had been deemed the final solar event of the entire hemisphere, which is just a fancy way of saying that it was the last sunset we'd ever see. Now, I know what you're thinking. How could this even be possible? How could a sunset be the last one? And honestly, I wish I could tell you. The news stations all had long-winded segments that presented scientific data and intellectually challenging explanations of how the Earth's core had shifted, or how the rotation on its axle was about to cease. Honestly, I could hardly understand half of the things they were saying. Each channel ended the segment with one final message, most of them mimicking each other. This evening, go outside and watch the sunset with your loved ones. This will be your last time you'll ever see it. This was such a romantic way of saying something so bleak. To tell us to go out and stand outside, watch this quick burning event that most of us had either ignored or seen 1,000 times, and appreciate that it was the last time it was going to happen. Of course, this led to some reasonable skepticism and a number of questions. If the half of the planet that we were on was forced into darkness, then surely the other half of the planet would be in If the half of the planet that we were on was forced into darkness, then surely the other half of the planet would be in never-ending daylight, right? That only made sense, yet the professionals said that it wasn't going to be the case. When they were asked how that was possible, how the sun was just going to cease to exist when it's set for every part of the planet, they simply reiterated that this would be the last one, and that we should appreciate it. Then, of course, there were the people that were curious about how life would be sustained without the sun. Without it, wouldn't we all be plunged into an ice age and killed off pretty much immediately? They struggled with this question, because the answer was technically yes. However, in this situation, they stated they weren't going to rely on technicalities, and that life would continue on as it had. This, of course, caused a major stir all around the planet. There was no way that life would continue without the sun, even excluding the fact the planet would turn into a solid sphere of ice. Every plant that couldn't be put under a glow light would end up wilting and dying in a matter of days. Without the ability to grow mass crops, the population would end up starving. Once again, this notion was dismissed. They told us that no one would end up starving because of this. All of these situations that were certain without the sun were all being dismissed by the world's top scientists. How? How was this not to be an apocalyptic event that brought about the death of the planet? How could they say no one would die from starvation, from freezing, from whatever other hardships would come from losing our sun? Of course, the confusion that stemmed from this official statement just ended up with the people questioning the truth behind the statements. A number of conspiracy websites and videos went up on the internet in a relatively short time we had this information. There are people everywhere that claimed that this was nothing more than a plan to make the populace subservient. That the world's government were going to somehow block out the sun for the rest of the world. And even some people that genuinely believed that there were some secret societies that had cursed the planet, and this was our penance. Fortunately, or unfortunately, however you choose to look at it, we could easily prove the conspiracy theorists either correct or incorrect. We were told the exact day that the final sunset would occur, the exact minute that we would last see our gorgeous burning ball. And, much like predicted, the sunset took place at 8:29 p.m. on that Friday night. We sat on a blanket that we had placed on a flat section of the roof and watched the stars glow after the sun had finally finished setting. It was a cool night with a light breeze. The sounds of the city grew from a silent anticipation to a nearly explosive panic within a matter of minutes. Whether or not the people believed that this was it, they had just witnessed, with their own eyes, the final solar event. So, what now? She looked over at me with a smile on her face. Well, now we just kind of sit here and wait to see what happens in the morning. Solar midnight is about 1:22 in the morning. Sunrise should take place about 6:30 or so. I guess we'll know by then what happens. I kept my eyes on the stars as I responded. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm certain," I nodded with a smile. We both just lay there silently staring at the blackness of the night sky. The aforementioned panic of the city slowly died down as people went to bed and decided to sleep through the night as they waited to see what was going to happen. The hours passed, she fell asleep, but I couldn't bring myself to close my eyes. I wanted to be awake to see what actually took place. I wanted to know what was actually in store for our little planet. I would glance over at the small clock radio every once in a while to see how many hours had passed, but I mostly focused on the darkness of the space and watched the glimmering stars as they danced across the sky. If anyone had been paying as much attention as I had at that moment, they would have noticed two things which could have given them some interesting insight into the situation. The first thing was that the stars were actually still dancing across the sky. Thus, the planet was, in fact, still rotating. The second thing to note was that the absence of the moon, with no sun, it was basically just a dark rock floating around our planet. I watched the clock flip over to 6 in the morning, and then tuned into the sound of the city. As the next half an hour passed, people would realize the sun was not coming back. That last night's sunset was actually the last. With every minute that passed, the sound of the city grew louder. There were subtle sounds of people sobbing, screaming, panicking, as the realization hit them. There was shouting, car engines roaring as people tried to speed out of the city, with nowhere to go. Then came the sounds of gunshots, glass shattering, People destroying the city as a panic mob. Everything came to an apex around 7 in the morning, when we were all sure that the statement of the scientists were right. "They were right, huh?" she said between a yawn and a stretch. "Yeah, I guess so," I sighed. "I really didn't want them to be." "I know." She stared back up at the sky. "So, what happens now?" "I'm not sure." I didn't want to tell her the truth. I didn't want her to know what exactly was going to happen. Hell, I wasn't even 100% sure about the next step. Just, there was going to be something. While everyone else was asking their questions and fighting with each other about whether or not we would all die of starvation, or freezing, or whether the sun would even disappear at all, I was fully aware this was going to happen. You see, around a month ago, my uncle died of an apparent suicide. He had shot himself in his basement with all of his radio equipment. He was an avid collector of various radio equipment, a hobby he had actually passed on to me. After his funeral, I went over to his house and down the stairs to the room where he kept all of his equipment. I sat at his desk and stared at his various sticky notes with random frequencies written on them, but one stuck out. It was on top of the strewed out detritus and had the words "and August 22nd" written on it and circled. Obviously, given the circumstances, I was curious about this. I turned the equipment on, put on my headphones, turned the dial to exactly what he had written. A single message played in the same tone that you would get if you called a disconnected phone number. "Notice 822-20TE. This is a notice to all involved in Operation Terra and the surrounding solar system. Operation Terra has concluded, and the simulation will be going offline. The final solar event will be scheduled for the 235th day of the 2020th year. On the morning of day 236, we will commence the data purge. Thank you for your time and understanding." This notice repeated over and over through the headphones. I listened to it a dozen more times as I tried to understand what the hell I was actually hearing. From here, I obviously reported the information, and they studied the signal. From there, they formulated their statement and told the world about what was happening. Well, sort of. They told everyone about the final solar event, sure, but they left out the final part of the notice. I had to give them credit. They didn't lie. No one was going to freeze to death, no one was likely to starve, but no one knew that they were all going to be removed from existence. I was the only person in the general population that was aware of what was coming next. The data purge. At first, I was curious about what it was going to actually be, or what it would feel like, but the realization that if it was just data that was about to be purged, I would cease to exist. I assumed it would just be an instantaneous death, and we would all just stop being. As we stared up at the sky, and the clock clicked over to 8 a.m., something strange started to happen. The stars started to disappear one by one, then the clouds, and finally the shades of blue in the sky. Within moments, it was pure black, and that blackness began to feel like it was getting closer to us. I reached down and grabbed her hand as I watched our reality compress into itself. I could faintly hear her screaming, the hellish sound of agony throughout the city as the wind roared upwards from the ground and towards the darkness that slowly descended. I kept my eyes open as I watched it engulf the taller buildings, and they became nothing. The closer it came, the stronger the suction into the darkness became. I let go of her, and she was pulled into the void, and I held my grip onto anything I could grab a hold of. I felt the darkness touch my skin. I felt my entire being as it was shredded into bits of data within whatever system was running the simulation. I felt the agony as I was pulled into a string of 1 and 0s and set to be overwritten. I said, go back to sleep! My mother yelled angrily while I lay in my bed, shaking with fear. Its arms then slowly retracted into the wall, nails scratching along my blanket, as she continued, "And leave my child alone!" I do hope you enjoyed these 2 tales, and thank you, As the Raven Dreams, for letting me use your stories. If you're on YouTube, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. If you're new, subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications. If you're on the podcast and you like to help, share this podcast with anyone who might enjoy it. Remember to check out my tree link to find my Patreon, merch, socials, and everything you want and more about me. I also love a comment down below or on Twitter, but let me get you that Sunday word first. Now onto our Sunday word. Last week's word was expand, and I got 2 comments. They are on screen on YouTube, and they are on Twitter if you would like to see them. Now onto this week's word, which is slice, which means a thin, broad piece of food, such as bread, meat, or cake, cut from a larger portion. Or cut something, specifically food, into slices. So, if you'd like to leave me a comment or at me on Twitter using this word in a comment, you'll be on next week's Sunday Word. But as always, guys, thank you for watching and listening. That means the world to me. Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.